So we have a question for you. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody, and during the course of the conversation, they say something, make a remark that just leaves you flat-footed? You're just like, how do I even respond to that? It just kind of catches you out of the blue, and the conversation usually goes on and maybe ends awkwardly, and then you think about it. If you're like me, you dwell on it, and you think about it when you lay down at night, and you're counting the ceiling tiles, and you think about it the next day, and eventually maybe you find an answer, and of course, at that point, the conversation's done, right? The conversation's moved on, and even if you were still with the person, you've missed the context, right? To go back and give them that great answer that they've had. So I had a conversation, I've had several conversations like that over time. I had a conversation like that about a little over 20 years ago. There was a lady who was a client, actually, state of Mississippi, and her name was Gail, so I'm just going to refer to Gail. Gail was an awesome person, okay, just to be clear, all right? But had a conversation with Gail. Actually, she was my client. My team was delivering a large system. She was the head of the organization for the client. So just natural to our roles, we talked a lot about work things, okay? And then over the course of time, you just kind of start to develop more of a rapport, and you start having conversations about other things. And you maybe start to catch nuggets of, hey, I might be talking to a believer here, okay? And so you kind of pull that thread a little further, and you realize, yeah, I'm talking to a believer. So it's kind of cool, right? When you're in a work sense and you discover there's another believer and somebody you interact with, and it's just enjoyable to have those conversations. So anyway, so Gail and I talked a lot. Okay, and I would say over the course of time we became friends. I mean, is that fair? Okay. Again, very cool. So Gail, a great person. We talked, a very intelligent person. Okay, as a measure of her intelligence. So she actually came up here to the Twin Cities to visit, to kind of do a site visit as a client. And we happened to be having a company outing that day. So we reserved a big shelter at a park somewhere. I don't remember where it was, east of the city and that. But we had a lot of food, and it was all good and everything. Families were there, so the employees, families, and one of our some clients. And lo and behold, somebody had brought a bunch of water guns. Okay, and so after we had food, the water guns broke out. Just to show you a sign of Gail's intelligence, she went looking for higher ground, and the first thing she did was, "Where's Bev?" Because there's nobody dumb enough to get the boss a flight, all that. And so she went and phoned Bev and said with that, and she stayed dry, right? So anyway, so as time went by, we talked about a lot of things. Gail actually came to work for me a couple of years later, and we were having a conversation, and the conversation turned to politics, of course, because at some point that's where any kind of conversation turns. And we're talking politics, and I don't know, kind of how it came up, but I remember making a comment that I thought Ronald Reagan had been a fantastic president, that it really kind of made a difference, that it kind of turned the corner of who we are as a nation. And the phone just went silent, just dropped. No. Okay, I stepped in something here. But just for context, okay, so when Ronald Reagan came in office, I was in middle school. At the time, the Cold War was really in its height between us and the Soviet Union. Kids, just a question. Kids are gone. Okay, so kids are gone, so I can't do this. But so Wednesday, like the first Wednesday of every year, we hear sirens, right? That are the tornado sirens. Okay, and I think what the kids still do is when those sirens go, they practice their storm drills. I don't know if English teachers. They go into the hallway and they get out and just they find a safe place just so they practice and they go somewhere safe for that. Well, when I was a kid in school, what we used to do was not once a month, but periodically they'd blow those same sirens, and we would go practice another drill. Okay, any idea what that drill was? Bomb shelter in the event of a nuclear war, because we're in the middle of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. And so those sirens would blow, and we would go into the center of the building, okay, and we'd get on our knees and we'd hunker down, okay, as if that would protect us from a nuclear attack, right? Okay, not so much. But that's what we would do. So that was for me, when about the time Ronald Reagan took office, that's where I was in life, okay? And I look at the 8 years that unfolded after that, and, we kind of spit in the eye of the Soviet Union and others, okay? We really stood up and established ourselves as a nation. Over those 8 years, we went from a nation that was racked with inflation and economic crisis to a pretty strong standing, okay? And I would say even turned the corner on some things, maybe from a moral standpoint as well. But bottom line, my view, Ronald Reagan was a good president for those reasons. And so I shared that, and again, silence on the other end of the phone. It's like, okay, so what happened? What did I step into? Because again, I know Gail pretty well at this point, and she's a believer, right? And believer, conservative, okay. That's when I started to realize those two things don't necessarily always go together, all right? But in the course of the conversations with Gail, we talked more and more, and I became more aware of her standing on things politically. But over the course of time, I really was troubled because what I just couldn't reconcile was where she stood in terms of her personal beliefs, her convictions, her faith. I couldn't reconcile that with some of the politics and kind of specifically the people. I submitted Ronald Reagan as being a strong president, and her perspective was submitted some other people who she felt were strong leaders politically that I would disagree with. And so what it came down to is I finally just asked her, I said, Gail, I'm having a hard time reconciling. You believe this in your heart in terms of your faith, but you vote for people who pass laws that don't align to that. How does that work? And again, I started out asking, have you ever had a conversation where somebody says something that just leaves you flat-footed? Okay. Her response was, well, I can't legislate morality. Okay? Well, where do you go with that? Okay, so the conversation, I don't know where the conversation went. I obviously chewed on it for some time. It's been 20 years. I remember the conversation, so obviously it resonated, right? So I chewed on it for a while, but in terms of responding to Gail, I have no clue what I babbled from there in terms of the response, right? But eventually I came to kind of my terms with what a response would be to that if that conversation ever came up again. Anyway, so fast forward, I was kind of where this lesson came from was starting down my trek through the Bible here, and I was in the early part of the scriptures, and I read some verses that just brought this back to mind, and just especially in light of some current events in society and some of the laws being passed, kind of in the current time, and totally lacking morality. Okay, and the Lord really kind of put this on my heart in terms of just to share with you a perspective of it. And so put together the message. I hope it's a blessing. To be honest, I hope to get more in today than I probably will. So we'll just kind of set the groundwork here today. Okay. So let's start with prayer. Father, again, we thank you and praise you for your goodness to us, Lord. Just thank you for just the gift of your word, Lord, and the insights that you give us through it, Lord. I just thank you for another day of breath. I think that I can be standing here, Lord, and share your truth freely with brothers and sisters, Lord. I just pray that you work through my weakness, Lord, that you would your words would resound, Lord, that you would prepare hearts, that you would just clear the clutter and clear distractions, Lord, and just that your message would find a resting place in hearts. We just pray in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so you can't legislate morality. Can you? Well, what does legislate mean? Strip it down. Legislate. According to Webster's, legislate just means to make or enact laws. Okay? To mandate, establish, or regulate by legislation. Simple enough, legislation. What does morality mean? Morality means conform to ideals of right human conduct. Okay? So, legislate morality. can you establish laws that require right human conduct? Okay, and more importantly, is it the government's responsibility to do that? Okay, that's the question, right? Okay, so as Christians, what do we believe is our basis for right human conduct? The Bible, thank you. Okay. So as I've looked into this, as I've researched it, and this is actually kind of a thing. This wasn't just something Gail just kind of brought up out of the blue of something she came up with. This is kind of a common mantra of people who have a perspective that says it's not the government's role to legislate morality. Okay. Now, near as I can tell, the mindset is, yeah, I'm a moral person. You know, people that hold this to be true is I'm a moral person. But you know what? It's if someone else doesn't have moral character, there's nothing the government can do in terms of passing laws to make them moral. Okay, that seems to be kind of the mindset. Okay, so therefore, it's not the government's role. It's the church's role. Okay, that's the mindset. I'll be honest though, as I read it, again, Gil's a friend, okay? But I honestly think that it's kind of an excuse to sidestep the reality that we know what the truth is, but yet sometimes vote for people who pass laws that are morally incorrect, okay? So anyway, my view aside, here's the question for you, all right? Should the government, federal government or state government, pass laws that expect moral behavior? Okay? Seeing some nods, seeing a lot of non-committals. All right, that's the question. Okay, and the reason I'm going there, again, there's a lot of ground I want to cover. I'd love to, if we would probably take us 3 hours to do everything we wanted to do. So it's going to be over the course of multiple messages over time. But it relates to the here and now of what we're seeing in government. Okay, it relates to the here and now. Quite frankly, we've got an election coming up in a few months that really matters. Okay, and people we're voting for really matter, and the laws they pass. Okay, and I'll not get too far off on that money trail here today, but that's really kind of the focus of a ladder message. So today is really, I just want to be rock solid, concrete. In your minds, should the government pass laws that expect moral behavior? Okay, that's the question. So like anything else, the Bible is our foundation. So let's take a look at the Bible for what it says in terms of this subject. All right. So turn your books to, probably guess, Exodus 20. Okay. Now, before we start, I was in a sermon once where there was this really old, wise, gray-haired pastor who was trying to set a timeline context for when things happen. And he used a couple signs. Okay? You may have been in a similar sermon, right? All right. Really old, gray-haired. I hope he's watching. Okay. So I just want to set a context for the span of time, all right? So in the beginning, all right? Where should I put this? Over here? All right. What do you think? Where about here? All right. Up a little? All right. How about that? All right. In the beginning. Okay. Today, where do I put this one? Over here? Right about here? Okay. Well, time keeps going by. All right, we'll put it there. All right. So in the beginning, today, it's about 6,000 years. Okay. Now, if you're one who says, Mike, wait a minute, what about the millions and billions of years? I've got a 10-minute video for you. But aside from that, if you're really stuck on that, just after church, you can come get that. You can drive north a few miles and put it on a tree somewhere. Okay. We'll just say in the beginning, this is when Adam and Eve were in the garden. Okay, that's basically the beginning of people, okay, and obviously today. So about 6,000 years. Again, the context for Exodus 20. So about 1,000 years after the beginning would have been Noah. Okay, Noah built a boat, and God saved humanity through the faithfulness of one man. About 1,000 years later, Abraham lived. Okay, Abraham, you'll read about Abraham in Genesis 17. I think you're probably familiar with the story. Abraham was a faithful man, answered God's calling. God rewarded his faithfulness, promising him that he would bless him abundantly. He would make many nations of him. One of those nations would dwell in Canaan, and his followers would be as numerous as the sand of the seashore. Okay, so Abraham, about a third of the way, so 2,000 years past, about 4,000 years ago. Okay, so God did bless Abraham. Okay, his offspring were numerous for sure. Now, God did not immediately make a nation of Abraham. He kind of did, but really, what Abraham's offspring were, and then Isaac, were really just they're nomadic. They're shepherds. Okay, they moved about. There was really no national unification thing. There was nothing that tied them together as a nation. Okay, and the problem with their lifestyle was as they wandered around, they actually interacted with a lot of different people groups, and a lot of those people groups they didn't know God, and they had some really, really ugly beliefs and practices. They had some gods, beliefs like sacrificing your kids in the fire to their gods. Okay, just not being faithful to one woman, and just in general, as the Bible refers to a lot of times, they did what was right in their own eyes. Okay, and that was not ultimately God's plan for the great nation that He was going to form, that He promised Abraham. And so some time went by. We know the story. Isaac had Jacob. Jacob later in life is renamed to Israel by God. Israel's offspring then goes into Egypt and is initially saved, being in Egypt from famine, but then ultimately is enslaved and endured for about 400 years. And so, Abraham, you might about a third of the way over between there. Abraham's like right here, about 450 years later. Okay, his offspring, Jacob's kids, basically Jacob's offspring, are in Egypt as a nation that's been enslaved. Okay, over the course of 400 years, they kind of multiplied. Okay, and so that as abundant as the sand of the seashore was starting to come into play. All right, so then what happened? God plucks out Moses and says, "You're going to lead these people out." Moses led the people out of Egypt, and now they're in the wilderness. Okay, Exodus 20, Moses is on a mountaintop, and God is laying down the law. Okay, because that's what you do when you are forming a new nation. Okay, you establish the law. I would even maybe say you establish the Constitution for that country. Is that fair? Okay. Okay. So let's dive into Exodus 20, and we're going to read them. I know you know them. All right, we're going to read them. So Exodus 20, I'm not going to read necessarily every word, so I might skip a couple. Exodus 20, verse number 3. You shall have no other gods before me. Okay, that's one. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third generation forth, okay, etc. That's number 2. So number 1, no other God before me. Number 2, you shall not make for yourself an idol. Number 3, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Bless you. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day. Keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath day to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. Okay. First four are really about our relationship with God. Okay. So number one, know the God before me. Number two, make no idols. Number three, don't misuse the name of the Lord. Number four, remember the Sabbath. Okay, now let's shift gears about our relationship with others. Number five, honor your father and your mother. Number six, you shall not murder. Number seven, you shall not commit adultery. Number eight, you shall not steal. Number nine, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. And number 10, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Okay. So again, God is laying down these laws. I think sometimes as Christians, we tend to look at these 10 Commandments. I think they're on the back hallway. There's a plaque that shows tablets of stone. Okay. And I think sometimes what we tend to do as Christians is we look at these 10 Commandments as the plaques of stone, and we kind of in our minds they're kind of in the really important hallway of really important laws that are foundational to us. But sometimes, honestly, I don't know that we live the 10 Commandments in our heart every day. And I think sometimes that's because we look at things like, show of hands. Okay, how many people at home, if you have a mantle above your fireplace, have a polished silver thing of a god that you bow down to and worship? Anybody? Show of hands? Nobody? Okay, I think so. Anybody commit murder? Anybody make a habit of stealing? Sexual immorality? Okay. So it's one where it's I think sometimes it's easy to set these aside and say, yeah, these are important laws for sure. Pretty much got those covered. Check, 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 and check. Right? Judd spoke to this a few years ago. I try not to pay attention to his sermons, but sometimes they just sink in. Just kidding, Judd. I like pay attention. So I'll be honest, that's how I've been with the 10 Commandments. All right, they're really important laws. I take them very seriously. Okay, but I look at them as the letter of the law. Don't commit murder. Don't commit murder. Got that one covered. All right. But as Judd kind of broke it down, he also kind of broke down my perception that I had this covered. All right. First commandment. Shall have no other gods before me. Okay, well, what's a god? Okay. How many times do I put myself and my wants and my priorities ahead of God's? Near all the time. Okay, guess I don't have that one covered so good. Lord, please forgive me for myself ahead of you. Right? Okay, how about the second one? You shall have no other gods before me. Again, I already asked. Who has the shiny gods on your mantle? Probably not. Okay. Are there any things in your life that you give more priority to and more urgency to than God? Okay. If you're normal and breathing, probably the answer is sometimes yes, right? Okay. Lord, please forgive me where I put things above you. Okay. How about misuse the name? Am I giving God my best, the best of my time? Am I giving Him first fruits? I don't mean from an offering standpoint. Am I giving God the best of what I have? When I close my eyes and pray, is it because I'm exhausted from the day and I'm going to fall asleep 3 minutes into the prayer? It's maybe not giving God your best, if that's your only prayer. Okay. Honor your father and your mother. My mom lives at home by herself. She's lonely every day. Okay. Do I help her with that? Okay. Third, thou shalt not kill. This one's easy, right? Jesus spoke to this one specifically. What did Jesus say about killing? Sorry, go ahead. Who said it?
Your heart hate in your heart.
If you harbor hate in your heart, you have as much as killed, right? My neighbor doesn't have a donkey or an ox, so I'm good on the last one. I don't. All right. Unfortunately, there's these people called the Joneses that I think we all know. They live fairly close to all of us. And the Joneses have the coolest house, they have the coolest cars, they have all the nice things, they have affluent wealth, they don't have worry in their life, or so it seems, right? And it's easy to covet some aspect of the Joneses, and who they are, okay? Or forgive me where I'm not content with what you do along the path, right? So, why did I go down this money trail? The reason I went down this money trail is because when God's on the mountaintop, laying down these laws, God didn't lay down these laws with the expectation that they would be etched in stone and kind of tucked away in the background of our minds as really important laws, but not so applicable for day to day. God laid down these laws because He wants them to be relevant to how we live every day in practice. And that's why Jesus clarified, like He did, what the laws really mean. Okay? So let me ask you this. Did God legislate morality with these laws? Okay, that should be very clear to you. Let me ask you again in the context of, do you know what the people were doing? Did God give these laws to people? They were His nation. They didn't need laws like this because they already lived this way, right? Not so much. You know what people were doing when God was literally etching these laws in stone? You know what people were doing? They were down, they made a golden calf, and they're dancing around it in sexual revelry. Okay? Did His people need these laws? Okay. Did God legislate morality? Okay, got it. Think we got it. End of sermon. All right. So, of course, you know, there is morality building these laws. That's purposeful. That's really kind of God's model. You could maybe even argue that the spirit of the Ten Commandments are such that truly, if you live them out, again, to boil it down even further, as the conversation Jesus had with the young ruler in the New Testament, it all sums up as, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, your mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay? Now, if we all truly did that, I'm not sure you need other laws, do you, really? I mean, if everything you did, living your life out was in that context, that pretty much covered it. But I think the Lord knew His people pretty well. And so He went out and basically for the next 3 chapters in Exodus, I'm not going to read them all. But I do want to point out some of the other laws that God put in place, just again to provide some guardrails for them. So let's, again, look in Exodus, flip forward just to chapter 21. I'm going to bounce quite a bit here through these. I won't spend a lot of time on them. So a lot of times people talk about thou shalt not kill as a commandment. More accurately stated as thou shalt not murder. So what verses 12 and 13 talk about Exodus 21 is, in verse 12, anyone who strikes a man and kills him shall surely be put to death. However, if he does not do it intentionally, but God lets it happen, he is to flee to a place I will designate. I mean, we would call that manslaughter today. Okay? An unintentional killing of somebody else. God provided a means of escape, not escape, but a place of safety for that person from retaliation. But verse 14 talks about murder. But if a man schemes and kills another man deliberately, take away from him by altering, put him to death. Okay, and that's what we call murder today. All right, let's skip down to verse 18. If men quarrel and one hits the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die but is confined to bed, the one who struck the blow will not be held responsible if the other gets up and walks around outside with the staff. However, he must pay the injured man for the loss of his time and see that he is completely healed. It's restitution. So just making it right. If you've taken away somebody's ability to make a living, then you need to pay restitution for that. Personal property and responsibility of it. Verse 33, if a man uncovers a pit, a big one, and fails to cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit must pay for the loss, and its owner and the dead animal will be his. So just property rights. Down in chapter 22, verse 2, self-defense, okay? If a thief is caught breaking in and is struck so that he dies, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. You have a right to defend yourself, right? How about lending? Let's go to verse 25, same chapter. If you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not be like the money lender and charge him no interest. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge and come to him by sunset. Because his cloak is the only covering he has for his body, what else will he sleep in? When he cries out to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. Okay, how about justice? We're not to pervert justice, basically. So chapter 23, verse 2. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. It's an interesting one in light of what's been on the news the last couple of weeks, huh? All right. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. And do not show favoritism to a poor man in his lawsuit. All right. How about being a good neighbor? Just continue on. Verse 4. If you come across your enemies, not your friends, come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to take it back to him. All right. Here again, love your neighbor as yourself. If you lost your ox or donkey, you would hope that somebody would bring it back, all right? So if you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to take it back to them, okay? If you see the donkey of someone who hates you falling down under its load, do not leave it there. Be sure to help him with it, all right? And then interestingly, even getting into stewardship of the land, how they take care of the land, verse 10, for 6 years, you sow your fields, harvest the crops, but during the 7th year, let the land lie unplowed and unused, and the poor among your people may get food from it, and the wild animals may eat what they leave, and do the same with your vineyard and with your olive grove. Okay. So God through this was, again, you don't pass laws if it's self-evident and it's what people already know to do naturally. Okay. These laws are all established in the context of God's plan for his nation. And it's really actually well summed up if you flip back to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, so if you think about Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, Deuteronomy, generally speaking, is kind of a summarization of what happened through Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. So turn to Deuteronomy chapter 4. And verses 5 through 8. So again, Deuteronomy 4, 5 through 8 really provides a summary, provides clarity on why God laid down these laws. Okay, so starting with verse 5. Behold, I have taught you statutes and ordinances, as the Lord my God commanded me. This is Moses speaking, by the way. That you should do them in the land which you are entering to take possession of. Keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of people, who when they hear all these statutes will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us, whenever we call upon him? And what great nation is there that has statutes and ordinances so righteous as all this law which is set before you this day? Again, sorry to hammer on this. Did God legislate morality for the nation of Israel? What's that last verse say? And what great nation is there that has statutes and ordinances so righteous as all this law which is set before you this day? Okay. I was reading one expositor was speaking to this passage, and I was going to summarize his summary, and it's like, you know what, his words are better than mine, so I'm just going to read them. Israel left Egypt as a mass of Hebrew slaves without a government, a constitution, or set of laws. During the 40 wilderness years, God gave them a comprehensive set of laws covering all aspects of life: family, diet, health, economics, warfare, and worship. If they obeyed, there would be little need for police, taxes, or government control. Kind of more on that, actually, in the context of people who don't want the government passing moral laws. If they obeyed, there would be little need for police, taxes, or government control. He goes on, the law was God's gift to them to straighten the courses of their lives and to teach them how to do justice and kindness towards each other and love towards Him. It was an evangelistic tool to attract other nations to God. It was a fence defining the boundaries between good and evil, but also a buffer to help them do right by each other and correct wrongs. Although written to this lawless mass of ex-slaves, it was meant for us modern lawless ones as well. Okay? And that's actually kind of relates to the points 2 and 3 that I'll get to another time. Okay? So I'll ask you one last time. As you read out, is it the government's responsibility to establish laws that lay out the expectation for moral living? Okay, it is. Okay. What do we use again as for our personal lives? What do we use as the pattern for how we behave and how we live? What teaches us that? Okay, the Scripture. So hypothetically speaking, if you were creating a brand new country, okay, and you were establishing the laws and maybe the constitution of that country, maybe a couple hundred years ago, would you start? And you were maybe not all, but most of you were Christians and had that foundation. Would you start from scratch and just kind of do what made sense to you, or would you look for an example of what God laid down for His nation and their laws? Would you use the example, or start from probably use the example, right? That really is the transition into the second point of the message. Okay. Second point of the message really is I just want to maybe remind you in some cases, or maybe teach you about the foundations of this country, why it was settled in the first place, okay, where the people came from, why the Revolutionary War was fought, and the foundations that this country was set upon, okay, and how those relate to what we just talked about. I really wish we had the time to do it all in one fell swoop, because I think the continuation would be helpful. But again, what I really wanted to hammer on today is the importance of us being on the same page, that you do legislate morality. That's what God did with the nation of Israel, okay? And that's how our country was founded, okay? So we'll talk about that in a second message, okay? The third message will address another misconception that's out there, okay? You can't legislate morality due to one misconception. Has anybody ever heard, there's another one, separation of church and state? Anybody ever heard that before? You guys have that? Okay. It's not in our Constitution, by the way, in case you didn't, so spoiler alert, it's not in there. A lot of people say it is, it's not. In fact, just the opposite is true. Okay, that Constitution was built on these same laws with the principles in the Bible. Okay, our Constitution was built with the expectation that the church is in the state. Okay, separation of church and state is the state needs to stay out of the church. Okay, that's what that's about. All right, so that's what we'll talk about in the third, and where that comes down to us is we have an election coming up. Okay, and what I challenge you to do, I can't stand the political commercials anymore than I don't like any more than you do. And I wish they didn't start like 3 years before the next election. But the reality is, there are some really important choices to make this November. Okay, and if you got questions about that, what you need to do is you need to look at the laws, not what they're saying in the commercials. Okay, especially at the presidential level. Okay, we got, in all likelihood, I know there's another candidate, but in all likelihood, the two primary candidates have both been president. Okay, so this isn't a hypothetical of what they're saying they're going to do if they got in office. Okay, we have an opportunity to look at what they did. All right, and there's I think quite a contrast. All right, so I'm not going to tell you how to vote. Okay, but what I'm going to do is be very pointed in terms of pointing out what we need to be looking at. Okay, also at the state level. Okay, some of the laws that have passed the last couple of weeks, or the last couple of years, are shocking, for lack of better words. Okay. Did you know there was a vote about a week ago about whether it would be legal in this state to go topless? Didn't hear about that in your local news, did you? Okay. So I will keep my shirt on. Just so you know. And just so you know, our governor said, I believe that modesty is important, but I also believe in the right of self-expression. Okay? So had the law passed, it would have been approved. Okay, so anyway, that's part 3. Dwight, would you guys go ahead and start working this way? So John and I are kind of working out the schedule for that. The part 2 of it actually aligns pretty nicely to July 4th, kind of that time frame. So we'll see. Probably part 2 will be in July, and part 3 will likely hammer on sometime in the fall. Those are the 2 questions. So, okay. Thank you, Dwight.